My name is Riley Saunders, 28 years old, DEA analyst. And the night my family decided to teach me a lesson about sharing, I was 4,000 miles away doing my job. Here's what I came home to: 3 people in federal custody at Honolulu International, 202 missed calls on my phone, and an empty safe with a handwritten note inside that said, and I'm quoting exactly, "Consider this your lesson. Love. Mum." The money wasn't mine. It was never mine. That's the part they didn't know. What they knew was this: I had a safe. I had a Charlotte apartment with a key they'd been holding on to for 14 months. And I had a combination that my mother guessed on the 3rd try. Because I was 28 years old and still using my sister's birthday on every lock I owned. The same way I had since middle school, and she knew that. She had always known that. My supervisor, Terry Walsh, was standing beside me when I watched them being processed. The woman in the blue cardigan, my mother was talking to the agents escorting her. She was always talking. The man in the golf shirt, my father had stopped talking sometime in the previous hour and hadn't started again. The girl with the sunburn, 25 years old, kept looking at the exit doors like she was calculating the distance. I did not go over. Terry said, "Step back another 20 feet. They'll document proximity as interference." I took 2 steps. Exactly 2. 202 missed calls. I knew the number because I'd counted them at Charlotte Douglas at 6 that morning. Sitting on a hard chair at the gate, waiting for my connection. I didn't have to count them. I counted because that's what my brain does when something is too large to feel it measures. 202 calls in 19 hours. My mother had never called me once every 6 minutes when I left for college. She hadn't called when I signed my DEA contract. She hadn't called on the day I shipped out to Bogota. But when there was $898,000 in a federal freeze and her name was in the system, then she called one every 6 minutes. The girl with the sunburn looked at me. Just for a second. Then she looked away. I thought, she didn't know. And then I thought, she didn't ask. Those are 2 different things. I would spend a long time figuring out exactly how different. 4 days earlier, I was in Bogota. The briefing took 11 minutes. Protocol for temporary asset custody standard procedure. When a primary safehouse gets compromised and a transfer needs a clean intermediate point. I'd handled evidence packages before, smaller ones, but the logistics were the same. Log, photograph, secure, wait for pickup. The pickup would come in 72 hours. My Charlotte apartment was on record as a U.S. domestic address. My supervisor would notify me when the transfer agent was en route. The briefing officer looked up at the end. "Who has access to your residence?" I paused. The pause lasted maybe a second and a half, not long enough for anyone to notice, but long enough for me to notice. "Family," I said. "My mother. She's had a key since last year. You haven't retrieved it?" "I haven't been home long enough to need to." He nodded and moved on. I watched him move on and felt nothing that I could name. Just a flat awareness. Like reading a footnote in a document you've already decided is fine. I packed my bag. I caught the 6:15 flight to Charlotte. The apartment had the smell of a place that doesn't get lived in, not dirty, just absent. Like air that had nothing to carry. I'd rented it 3 years ago because I needed a US address, and I'd been back maybe 6 times since. Each time I came, it looked the same. Furniture from a weekend at IKEA. A print on the wall I'd chosen because it was neutral. A kitchen with 2 clean mugs and nothing else on the counter. It did not look like anyone's home. That was intentional, though I would have told you it was practical. The safe was in the bedroom closet. I opened it, took out the photographs I needed, and started the log. 47 bills. I photographed each one, front and back, recorded the serial numbers in the database. The whole thing took 11 minutes. When I was done, I placed the bills inside, closed the door, and set the combination. I stopped for a second with my hand on the dial. The combination I chose was Paige's birthday. October 3rd. 0, 1, 0, 3. Old habit. I'd used Paige's birthday for my locker in middle school, my bicycle padlock in high school, my diary which I'd kept for exactly 4 months at age 13 before deciding the exercise was too risky. Always her birthday. I'd never thought about why. It was just the number that felt right. The number attached to the one person in that house I hadn't been afraid of. I set the combination and closed the closet door. 72 hours. I told myself. Nobody knows this address except the agency. I got my laptop out and worked until midnight. Then I went to sleep. The phone woke me at 3:14 in the morning. Not my mother's ringtone. Terry's. I picked up before I was fully awake, training, not intention. Saunders. Don't ask me any questions yet, Terry said. Just listen. Where is the asset right now? 1 beat, in the safe. I need you to go look. 14 steps from the bed to the closet. I know because I counted them at some point in the dark, though I don't remember deciding to count. The hallway light. The closet door which I had closed before I went to sleep. It was open. I turned on the overhead. The safe door hung half an inch ajar. Inside, nothing. Except a piece of paper. Folded once. Written in handwriting I'd known my whole life. I already knew what it said. I'd found out later, reading it in the closet at 3 in the morning, that some part of me had known what it would say before I unfolded it. Not the words exactly. The logic. The particular shape of thinking that would lead a person to break into their daughter's home and leave a note about it. You haven't shared enough with this family for long enough. Consider this your lesson. Love. Mum. It's empty, I said. I know. Terry's voice had the particular flatness of someone who'd already done the hard math. Freeze activated at 2:18. Serial numbers hit a system flag at an ATM at Daniel K. Inouye Airport, Honolulu. 3 individuals were placed in federal hold at 2:47. I waited. Riley. Their names are Donna Saunders, Gary Saunders, and Paige Saunders. No sound from either of us for a moment. Then Terry said, "You need a lawyer. Not because you're under suspicion, because clearance review opens automatically in 24 hours, and you need to protect your position. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood. I was standing in my closet at 3 in the morning with the note still in my hand. And I understood every word she was saying. And I was already running the calculations, what to document, what to pull, what would matter in the review, because calculation was the only thing I knew how to do in a crisis, the only thing that felt like solid ground. But underneath the calculations, something else was happening. Consider this your lesson. My mother believed this. That was the part I kept returning to. Not the theft, not the 72-hour window she'd planned around, not the flight she'd booked, not the hotel she'd checked into before the first dollar had even been spent. The lesson. She had taken nearly $900,000 from a federal safe, flown across the Pacific with my father and my little sister, and she had left me a note about sharing. She believed I had money I was hiding from my family. She believed that the success I'd built from nothing, the scholarship, the degree, the 3 years in Bogota, where I learned to sleep in 4-hour blocks and eat lunch at my desk and think in a second language, she believed all of it belonged, at least in part, to her, to them, that I had taken something and not returned it. I had been 4,000 miles away doing my job, and she had broken into my home, and she had left me a note about a lesson. I placed the note back inside the empty safe. Not because I needed to preserve it, not because I had some strategic reason. I just needed it out of my hand. I needed to not be holding it anymore. I closed the safe door. The latch clicked. 68 degrees in the apartment, the air conditioning humming against the November dark. Terry was still on the line. "Riley, I'm here. You need to be at the office at 6:30. bring everything. I know, I said. I set the phone down on the nightstand and stood in the closet doorway for a minute. Maybe longer, long enough for my eyes to adjust completely to the dark. Long enough that I could see my own reflection in the window at the end of the hall. A figure standing in a doorway in a dark apartment, not moving. I thought about how many calls it takes to be somebody's mother. I thought about a note that said, love. Then I went and put on coffee because it was 3 a.m. and I wasn't going back to sleep. And some things are just true regardless of what else is happening around them. The DEA field office in Charlotte is on the 14th floor of a building that also houses a tax attorney, a property management company, and a physical therapy clinic. There is nothing on the directory in the lobby to indicate we exist. I had always liked that about it. I got there at 6:28. Terry was already at her desk with 2 coffees and her laptop open and the particular stillness of someone who had been awake for a long time making decisions. Sit down, she said. Not unkind, just efficient. I sat. She pushed one of the coffees toward me, without looking up. You're not a subject, she said. I want that on the record between us, before anything else. You are a witness and a victim of theft. Your cooperation is voluntary and I'd like you to give it, but you can walk out of here and lawyer up, and nobody will hold that against you. She looked at me then. I would prefer you didn't, because this gets cleaner with your help, but I want you to know the door. I know the door, I said. Okay. She pulled up a window on her laptop and turned it so I could see the screen. Here's where we are. The bills were flagged at 2:18 when the first serial number hit an ATM camera at Daniel K. Inouye by 2:47. The system had matched the full manifest, and we had a federal freeze across every card, account, and device linked to the 3 individuals. They were detained at the airport at 3:02. They had already checked into a hotel in Waikiki, using a credit card belonging to your mother room for 2 nights, $840. She paused to let that settle. They booked the hotel 6 days ago, she said. They purchased the plane tickets 9 days ago. I drank some of the coffee. It was too hot, and I drank it anyway. So this wasn't impulsive, I said. Not remotely. Terry folded her hands on the desk. Your mother had a plan. She knew your address. She had a key. She knew your safe existed. Or at least suspected it. Which is why she tried 3 combinations instead of giving up after the first. She had flights. She had a hotel. The only thing she didn't have was the knowledge that the money was federally serialized. A small pause, which is information she couldn't have had. That's what protects you in the review. What she took wasn't yours, and your manifest proves it. Outside the window, Charlotte was grey, a low cloud ceiling pressing down over the skyline. I thought about my mother standing in my closet at 2 a.m, trying combinations. October 3rd, 0103. I thought about the patience of that, trying once, failing, trying again, not leaving. There's something else, Terry said. She clicked to another window. Your sister posted an Instagram story at 6:47 in the morning. That's 4.5 hours after the theft. She was on the plane. She turned the screen toward me. It was a selfie. Page. Window seat. The sky outside still dark, holding a small cup of orange juice up toward the camera like a toast. Filter warm. Face relaxed and happy, in the particular way of someone who has just gotten away with something they don't know they're getting away with. The caption said, just what we needed. I looked at the photo for long enough that it stopped looking like my sister's face and started looking like the face of a stranger who happened to share her cheekbones. Then I looked away. I need to know, I said, what the exposure looks like for her specifically. The youngest, Paige Saunders. Terry nodded. 25. No prior record. Tss. Terry nodded. Terry nodded. Terry nodded. Terry nodded. If she maintains she didn't know the source of the funds and the evidence supports that reading, which it currently does, since your mother appears to have told her this was a surprise trip, she's looking at a misdemeanor. Federal record, but not a felony. Probation. Possibly eligible for expungement after 3 years. What does possibly mean? It means it's not guaranteed. It means it depends on how clearly she cooperates and whether the prosecutor decides she was genuinely deceived or conveniently incurious. Terry looked at me directly. There's a difference between not knowing and choosing not to ask. The same thing I had thought in the airport. Standing 30 feet away. She didn't know. She didn't ask. Okay, I said. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. I answered questions about the key when I'd given it to my mother, whether I'd asked for it back, why I hadn't. I answered questions about the combination, why I'd chosen it, whether anyone in the family might have guessed it. I gave them the full account. The briefing in Bogota, the flight, the apartment, the 11 minutes with the manifest, the time I went to sleep, the time Terry called. At some point, a second agent joined us, a man named Holloway, who sat quietly and took notes and didn't ask me anything until the 3rd hour, when he asked whether my mother had ever discussed my finances with me. I said she discussed what she imagined my finances to be. He wrote that down. The review board, Terry explained, would look at the chain of custody documentation and my compliance record, and the fact that the manifest had been logged before I left Bogota, time-stamped in the central database, photographed, and sealed correctly. They would look at how quickly I had reported the theft. They would look at the note. The note is actually helpful, Holloway said, in the tone of a man identifying a useful piece of hardware. It demonstrates intent on her part. She wasn't confused about whether the money was hers to take. She believed she was making a point. I thought about "consider this your lesson" written in my mother's looping cursive on a page torn from what looked like a notepad she must have packed specifically for the occasion. The kind of gesture that requires planning, a lecture, prepared in advance, for a classroom she had not yet broken into. Yes, I said. She was definitely making a point. By noon, they had everything they needed from me for the first round. Terry walked me to the elevator. She stood in the hallway while I waited, and I could tell she was deciding whether to say something. She's going to try to use you, Terry said. Her lawyer will contact you. They'll frame it as looking out for the family. They'll ask you to make a statement about what you think she understood or didn't understand. They may ask you to speak to character. I know. You don't have to do any of that. I know. The elevator arrived. I got in. Terry held the door for one moment. Riley, for what it's worth, your manifest is going to close this review in your favor. Whatever else happens, you did your job right. That's not nothing. She let the door go. Get some sleep. The doors closed and I stood in the elevator going down and thought about the 11 minutes. How I had logged every bill out of habit, out of training, out of the particular shape my brain had taken in 3 years of work that required precision before it required anything else. I hadn't thought about what the manifest would do for me later. I hadn't thought about later at all. I had just done the thing correctly, because that was the only way I knew how to do it. It had saved me. A process. 11 minutes of paperwork at 9:30 in the evening because that was protocol. My mother had spent 9 days planning. She had bought tickets, booked a room, packed a bag, driven to my apartment, tried 3 combinations on a safe, found the right one, and flown across the ocean. And she had been undone by 11 minutes of routine I'd already forgotten. I walked through the lobby of the building, past the directory that didn't list us, and out into the grey December air. My phone was in my jacket pocket. 202 missed calls, still sitting there. I had set it to silent at 3 in the morning and hadn't changed that. I knew what was happening on the other end. New calls now, probably. Her lawyer, maybe. Possibly Paige, who would have had her own phone returned to her by now. Who would be sitting in some waiting room in Honolulu, understanding, for the first time, that this was not going to be handled the way my mother had told her it was going to be handled. I sat in my car for a minute without starting it. Then I did something I had told myself I wasn't going to do. I opened the voicemail. Not to listen closely, I set it to speakerphone and let them run while I looked out the windshield at the parking structure wall. The first message was from 2:53 in the morning. Riley. This is a misunderstanding. They're saying things that aren't true. Call me back right now. You can explain to them that this is family. This is our money. They'll listen to you. The ninth message was from 5:17. You're not picking up. Paige is crying. Your father isn't talking. I need you to understand that we are sitting here because of you. You brought this. You left your family here. I skipped forward. Message 31. 11:43 in the morning. Riley. I spoke to a lawyer. He says if you make a statement that I didn't understand the money was government property, the charges come down significantly. That's all. One statement. One sentence. You say you don't believe I knew. That's the truth anyway. I didn't know. You just say what's true and this is over. This is your family. I turned off the speakerphone. 31 messages before she mentioned a lawyer. 30 messages of anger and blame, and you did this and you left us here. And then message 31, which was different. Focused, the anger still there, but underneath it now, organized around something specific. She had talked to a professional and come out of it knowing exactly what she needed from me. She needed one sentence. I thought about all the things I had given this family across 28 years that had been framed as obligations rather than gifts. The scholarship money, the birthday calls I made regardless of what was happening in my own life, the visits I scheduled around her preferences, the conversations where I said less than I thought so that she could say more than she should have. 1,000 small adjustments. None of them ever named because naming them would have meant admitting they were real. One sentence. I put the car in reverse. I thought about calling her back. I ran through the mechanics of it, what I would say, what she would say, where it would go, and I recognized what I was doing, which was practicing a conversation I had already decided not to have. There was nothing I could say on a recorded line right now that helped anyone, including her, including Paige, and underneath that, quieter. The truer thing, there was nothing left to explain. I pulled out of the parking structure and drove back to my apartment. I needed a shower. I needed actual food. I needed sleep that wasn't 4 broken hours on a red-eye. These were the facts of my situation, and I was going to handle them one at a time, because that was what I could control. The navigation screen still had my mother's address saved as the home location from 18 months ago, the last time I'd visited. I had never changed it, because I had never thought about it one way or another, the same way I had never changed the lock, the same way I had used Paige's birthday and not questioned why. I reached over and deleted the address at a red light. I didn't put anything in its place. I just drove. The letter arrived at the DA office on the 3rd morning. Addressed to me care of the Charlotte Field Division, which meant someone had done enough research to know where I was working and had wanted me to understand that they knew. It was from a law firm. 3 names on the letterhead, an address on South Tryon Street, a fax number that no one had used since 2011. The letter was 2 pages, single-spaced, and it said a great many things in careful legal language, but the core of it was this. My client, Donna Saunders, was prepared to assert in any proceeding that the asset in question had been stored without adequate security measures in a private residence accessible to non-agency personnel, that this represented a deviation from standard protocol that a reasonable person might interpret as negligence, and that said negligence had created the conditions under which the subsequent removal occurred. In other words, this was my fault, and my mother's lawyer was going to say so. Terry read it twice. She set it down on her desk and looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you were expecting but still find unpleasant when it arrives. This is a good strategy for them, she said. I want to be clear about that. It's not going to work, but it's a good strategy. Someone hired a firm. My guess is a family member on her side, aunt, cousin, someone with resources who got a phone call from Hawaii. She pushed the letter back toward me. The argument is that your clearance review is still open, which means there is technically a question about your conduct on the table, and if they can get any traction on the negligence angle, they can reframe the whole thing. Your mother wasn't stealing from the government. She was making a reasonable assumption about property belonging to her daughter. I looked at the letter. The font was clean, and the margins were even, and someone had charged someone else several $100s an hour to write it. She didn't know it was government money. I said, no. But she knew it wasn't hers. Can they actually damage the review? Terry thought about that for a moment in the way she thought about things she'd already decided, where the pause wasn't uncertainty but something more like courtesy. If they can establish that the key was given voluntarily, that the address was known to your family, that the safe combination was guessable from personal information, they can build a narrative. They won't win the criminal case, but they might be able to create enough noise around the clearance review to get it extended. And an extended review means you're in limbo. And limbo is expensive. I understood what she was telling me. Limbo meant restricted assignments. Limbo meant Bogota put on hold. Limbo meant my entire professional life paused while a law firm on South Tryon Street generated paperwork designed to protect 3 people from the consequences of a decision they'd made freely. What do I do? I said. You give a full statement. Everything. The key, the history, why the combination was what it was, the pattern going back as far as you can document it. She folded her hands, and you do it before they can get their version on the record first. I gave the statement that afternoon. It took 4 hours. A woman named Specialist Kowalski typed while I talked. And at some point, someone brought in a second cup of coffee without being asked, and I talked through the scholarship money, and the car insurance, and the electric bill, and the Christmas cousin, and 23 other things I had not known. I still remembered until I started listing them in order. Saying them out loud was different from knowing them. They had lived in me for years as a kind of ambient weight. A pressure I'd adjusted my posture around without ever naming the source. Spoken into a room, with someone typing, they became something else. Evidence. Chronology. A record. When I was done, Specialist Kowalski read the statement back to me, and I corrected 2 dates and signed it. Walking out of the building into the grey Charlotte afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in days, and also, underneath that, something that was not quite sadness, but was adjacent to it. The way you feel after you've finally thrown something away that you'd been keeping for the wrong reasons, relieved, and also aware, for the first time, of exactly how long you'd been carrying it. That evening, Terry called me at 9:47. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment, with my back against the kitchen cabinets, eating crackers from a sleeve, because I hadn't wanted to go to the grocery store and couldn't remember what was in my refrigerator. I picked up on the second ring. There's something in the investigation report I want you to know before you see it officially tomorrow, she said. Are you somewhere you can sit with it? I'm sitting. When the forensics team ran the safe, they pulled the attempted access log. Digital safes record failed combinations. Your mother tried 3 before she got it right. I waited. The first was your birth date. Month and day, 4 digits. Outside my window, a car passed on the street below. Its headlights swept across the ceiling and disappeared. The second was the street number of the house you grew up in. I was still holding the sleeve of crackers. I set it down carefully on the floor beside me. The third was your sister's birthday. October 3rd. 0103. The silence in the apartment was the specific kind that happens when a building's heating system shuts off and you realize the low hum had been there all along. I hadn't noticed it until it stopped. Riley, I'm here. I thought you should hear it from me. I leaned my head back against the cabinet. The ceiling was white and featureless, and I looked at it for a long time. What I was turning over wasn't the fact of the 3 combinations. I could have predicted the 3 combinations if I'd thought about it. Which I hadn't, because thinking about it would have meant thinking about what it implied. What I was turning over was the implication itself. My mother had stood in my closet at 2 in the morning. In an apartment she had entered with a key I'd given her for one package one time, and she had tried my birth date first. Then the house number, then my sister's birthday. She had tried the things I loved. In order, until one of them opened. She had known me well enough to do that. After everything, after the years of distance, after the phone calls I didn't answer, after the 3 years in Bogotá where I had been. If I was honest, deliberately unreachable, she had stood in my closet and known exactly which numbers to try. I had spent 6 years building a life she couldn't reach. And the thing that had undone it was not anything she'd done. It was a habit I'd carried out of that house without knowing I was carrying it. A 4-digit number attached to the one person there I hadn't wanted to lose, and I had never changed it, because changing it would have meant examining why I'd chosen it, and I hadn't been ready to do that. She knew, I said. Not to Terry, not really. Just out loud. She knew you very well, Terry said. That's different from what she did with what she knew. I thought about that for a while. Knowing someone well enough to guess which numbers they use, standing in their closet, and using that knowledge to take something that doesn't belong to you. The first thing and the second thing were not the same thing, and I had been confusing them, in one form or another, for most of my adult life. The fact that she knew me had always felt like a kind of tether, like evidence of something real underneath all the rest of it, like a reason. But knowing someone and caring for them are not the same thing either. You can know a lock well enough to pick it, and still not have any right to what's inside. I got up from the floor. I went to the closet. The safe was still there. Door closed. Latch set. I stood in front of it for a moment in the dark, not turning on the light. Then I reached out and dialed the combination to 0. All 4 digits. A blank. I thought for a minute about what to set it to. Not a birthday. Not an address. Not anything attached to anyone else. I set it to the last 4 digits of my badge number. A number that existed because I had earned it. A number that was mine in a way that October 3rd had never quite been, because October 3rd had always been about something I was hoping for, rather than something I actually had. I closed the safe. The latch clicked in the quiet apartment. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed and let myself feel, for a few minutes, all of the things I had been filing away since 3:14 in the morning 2 days ago. Not managed, not measured, just felt, the grief of it, and it was grief. I understood that now. Even if the thing being mourned was not a person but a possibility, a version of a relationship that had probably never existed outside of my own careful hope for it. The exhaustion, the particular loneliness of being known well enough to be used. I didn't cry. I'm not sure I needed to. Some things settle into you differently. Quieter. A rearrangement rather than a release. After a while, I lay back on top of the covers and looked at the ceiling and let the heating system hum its low constant note. And I thought about what I'd said earlier that day. In the car, when Terry asked about the key, I haven't been home long enough to need to. That was what I'd said. I had framed it as logistics. The truth was simpler and less flattering. I had not retrieved the key, because retrieving it would have been a statement. And making that statement would have required having the conversation, and having the conversation would have closed a door I had been keeping open with no clear plan for what I would do with the opening. The door was closed now. Not by me. By a digital safe log and a law firm on South Tryon Street. And 3 combinations tried in order. Smallest loss first. I was not glad about how it had closed, but I was. Somewhere underneath the grief and the exhaustion and the crackers on the kitchen floor, aware of a strange and unfamiliar quiet. The kind that comes after a sound you've stopped noticing finally stops. The kind that means something has ended, and the space it left is not yet filled with anything else. I turned off the lamp on the nightstand. Tomorrow, Terry would tell me the clearance review timeline. Tomorrow, the prosecutor would have reviewed my statement. Tomorrow, there would be more steps. more documentation, more of the careful work of making sure that what was true was also on record. But tonight, the apartment was quiet, and the safe had a new combination. And the door I had been propping open for 6 years was, finally, just a door. I closed my eyes. Outside, Charlotte went on doing what cities do, the low murmur of it. Indifferent and continuous, not asking anything of anyone. That was fine. That was exactly fine. The decision took me 3 days. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew by the morning after I changed the combination. In the same way you know something when you've been circling it long enough that you've memorized the shape of it from every angle. I knew. What took 3 days was the work of making sure I was doing it for the right reasons. Because I had learned, slowly and at some cost, that I am capable of telling myself a clean story about my own motives when the actual motives are more complicated. So I sat with it. I went to the office. I answered Terry's questions. I ate dinner at a table instead of over the sink. And on the morning of the 4th day, I called Terry and told her I would testify, and that both sides could call me, and that I would say what was true. She said, "Okay, just that." Then she said, "I'll let the prosecutor know." And that was the whole conversation, which was exactly right. The hearing was 12 days after the night in Honolulu. U.S. District Court. Charlotte, a building I had driven past 100 times without ever thinking about what happened inside it. The security line in the morning was short. The elevator was faster than the one in the DEA building. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected, with overhead lighting that didn't quite reach the corners and chairs that were designed for function over anything else. I sat in the witness waiting area for 40 minutes before they called me. There was a woman there with a toddler on her lap, and a man in a UPS uniform, and a college-age kid who kept checking his phone and putting it away and checking it again. The ordinary traffic of a place where serious things happen to ordinary people every day. I found it steadying in a way I hadn't anticipated. Whatever was about to happen to me had happened here before, to someone else, in some different configuration, and the building was still standing. They called my name at 10:12. The courtroom had 7 people in it when I walked in, plus the judge, plus the court reporter. The prosecutor, a woman named Hartwell, who had called me twice in the past week to make sure I understood what would be asked, sat at one table. At the other table, a defense attorney I recognized from the letterhead. And beside him, my parents. My father was wearing a collared shirt I didn't recognize. Blue with thin stripes. The kind of thing someone buys when they need to look respectable on short notice. He was looking at the table in front of him. He had the specific stillness of a man who has decided the best available option is to be as invisible as possible. And he had been practicing that option his whole life, and he was very good at it. My mother was wearing her blue cardigan, the same one from the airport. I noticed at first that she had worn it again, which meant either she had not thought about what I would think when I saw it, or she had thought about it and decided it didn't matter, and I genuinely could not tell which of those was more likely, and I understood, standing in the doorway of the courtroom, that I probably never would. She looked at me when I walked in. I looked back. For a moment we were just 2 people looking at each other across a room, and I tried to read what was in her face and found something I hadn't prepared for. She looked tired, not frightened, not calculating, just tired, in the way of someone who has been running a certain kind of effort for a very long time and has recently discovered it wasn't working. Then she looked away, and I walked to the witness stand, and the marshal swore me in, and it began. The defense attorney went first. He was good. He had a methodical quality and a pleasant voice, and he asked his questions the way you build something, one piece at a time, each one seeming reasonable in isolation, the structure only visible when you stepped back and looked at the whole. He established that I had given my mother a key voluntarily, He established that she had no reason to know the contents of the safe were government property. He established that the combination could have been guessed by someone with knowledge of my personal information, which was information I had provided to my family myself. Over years, every question was accurate. Every answer I gave was accurate, and I understood what he was building. And I understood that the structure was sound as far as it went. And I also understood that it was a partial structure, a wall with no building behind it. He asked, "Miss Saunders, would you say it was reasonable for your mother to believe the contents of that safe were your personal property?" I said. She had no way to know for certain that they weren't, so a reasonable person in her position might have believed she was accessing her daughter's personal savings. A reasonable person in her position, I said, would not have accessed the safe at all. He moved on. When Prosecutor Hartwell stood up, she had a yellow legal pad with a short list on it, and she did not look at it once. She said, "Miss Saunders, the defense has established that your mother had access to your home and personal information. I'd like to ask you about the broader context of that access. Can you describe, in your own words, the pattern of financial behavior you documented in your statement to this office?" And I told it. Not all of it, there wasn't time for all of it. And not all of it was relevant in a legal sense. But I told enough. The scholarship money, $2,300, redirected toward a television because my mother had decided I didn't need a television in a dormitory, and she did need one in the living room. The car insurance, 37 months of payments on a vehicle I no longer drove, because asking for the insurance to be transferred meant a conversation about why I wasn't coming home for holidays and I hadn't been ready to have it. The security deposit, the electric bill, the cousin and the Christmas story about a cruise that never happened. I told it in order. I told it the way I had told it to Specialist Kowalski, in a room with a humming computer and a second cup of coffee. Except that this time, the room had 7 other people in it, and my mother was one of them. Somewhere in the middle of the electric bill, I stopped looking at the space above my mother's head and looked at her directly. I don't know why I did that. I hadn't planned to, but I did it. And I kept going. And I said, in 28 years, every success I had was described by my mother as a family achievement. Every resource I accumulated was treated as a family resource. The safe was the first time there were legal consequences to that pattern. Because the money in the safe did not belong to me. It had never belonged to me, and she took it anyway. Because taking things that belonged to me was what she had always done. And there was no reason in her understanding of the world for this situation to be different. The room was quiet in the way rooms are quiet when everyone in them has stopped moving. The difference, I said, was the serial numbers. Prosecutor Hartwell thanked me and sat down. The defense attorney declined to recross. The judge made a note. The court reporter's fingers moved and stopped. I looked at my mother one more time before I stepped down. What I saw was not what I had been bracing for. No anger. No tears. What I saw was the particular expression of someone encountering, for the first time, a version of events they had not considered. Not because the facts were new, but because they were being spoken out loud. In this room. By this person. In this tone of voice. Like hearing a song you wrote being played back to you and realizing for the first time what it sounds like from the outside. She was looking at me the way you look at someone you thought you knew. I stepped down from the witness stand and walked back through the courtroom and out the door into the hallway, where the fluorescent lights were the same as everywhere else, and a water fountain dripped quietly against the wall, and I stood there for a moment with my hand against the wall and breathed. It was not relief. It was something quieter than relief, the feeling of having done a specific thing completely, of having said a true thing, in a place where true things are supposed to matter. I had not performed it. I had not done it to hurt anyone. I had done it because it was the most accurate account I had, and accuracy was the thing I knew how to offer. Terry was waiting at the end of the hall. She handed me a cup of coffee from the cart near the elevator bank and did not say anything. which was exactly the right thing. We took the elevator down together. Outside, Charlotte was doing what Charlotte does in November, overcast and cool. The kind of weather that doesn't commit. I drank the coffee standing on the sidewalk and watched a woman try to parallel park a minivan and eventually succeed, and somewhere above us in a room with bad overhead lighting, the prosecutor and the defense attorney were working out the terms of what came next. What came next, as it turned out, was this. My mother and father each entered a felony plea. 18 months of probation, restitution payments on a schedule, mandatory financial counseling. My sister entered a misdemeanor plea, 12 months of probation. Eligible for expungement after 3 years, provided she completed the terms without incident. The full amount was recovered, all of it, because the freeze had propagated before any of it could be spent beyond the 4 bills at the airport ATM. The clearance review closed 11 days after the hearing. No action taken. I found out about Paige's expungement eligibility from Terry. Not from my family, because my family had stopped calling me sometime around the day I gave the statement. I did not know if that was anger or shame or something else entirely. And I made myself, slowly, stop trying to figure it out. Some things you cannot know from the outside. And some things you cannot know from the inside either. And the question of what my mother had actually felt, ever, for me that was a question I was going to have to learn to carry without answering. I went back to Bogota 6 weeks after the hearing. The city was the same as I'd left it. The coffee was the same. The view from the office window was the same grey-green sprawl, the same mountain edge on the horizon, the same smell of altitude and diesel, and something floral that I had never been able to identify and had stopped trying. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop and started work. And it felt like something I had been doing forever. And also, in some small way, like something I was choosing for the first time. In the drawer of my desk, in a manila envelope, was the note. I had kept it, not for legal reasons. It had been photographed and logged, and it existed in 3 separate databases now, so the original was redundant in every practical sense. I kept it because I wanted to have the option of looking at it. Not often. Not as a ritual, just as a fact I could return to when I needed to remind myself that the thing had been real. Consider this your lesson. Love, Mum. I used to read that and feel the word love as a wound, the way it sat at the end of that sentence, after everything it was attached to. I'm not sure anymore that I read it that way. What I read now is just a signature, a habit of closing. She had signed letters with love her entire life, in the same looping hand. Because that was how you ended letters. Because her mother had done it, and her mother's mother had done it, and the word had long since separated from whatever feeling it was supposed to represent. It was punctuation. It was how you knew the message was done. That was sad in a way I didn't know what to do with yet. I suspected I would be figuring it out for a long time. Terry called at 11 that morning, Charlotte time. Bogota was an hour ahead, so it was noon for me. And I was eating lunch at my desk, which was a habit I had developed over 3 years, and was apparently permanent. Clearance review officially closed, she said. I wanted you to hear it directly. You told me 11 days ago. I know. I wanted to say it again. Thank you, I said. And meant it. There was a pause on the line. The particular kind that means someone is about to say something they've been thinking about for a while. I let it be. Terry said, for what it's worth, I've been doing this for 17 years. The statement you gave was one of the clearest pieces of testimony I've seen. Not dramatic, just clear. I want you to know that. I looked at the mountain edge on the horizon. Some clouds had come in from the west, the way they did in the late morning, low and flat. The manifest helped, I said. The manifest helped, she agreed. But so did you. We said goodbye, and I finished my lunch and opened the next file and worked through the afternoon, the way you work when work is the thing that makes sense, when the motion of it is its own answer to questions that don't have other answers yet. Before I left the office that evening, I opened the desk drawer and looked at the envelope for a moment. I didn't take the note out. I just looked at the envelope and thought about what was in it. And then I closed the drawer and turned off my desk lamp and went home. The apartment I rented in Bogotá was small and had one window that looked out over a street with a good bakery on the corner. I had put a photograph on the wall 6 months ago. Not a neutral print, but an actual photograph. One I'd taken on a trail outside the city on a Sunday, when I had nothing to do and had gone walking instead of sitting still. Just a hill and some trees, and the kind of afternoon light that does something interesting when it comes through clouds. It was not a beautiful photograph. Technically, it was mine. I made dinner at the stove and ate it at the table, and afterward I sat with a cup of coffee and did not check my phone, and outside the bakery closed for the night, and the street got quiet the way streets do when a city shifts from its evening mode to something later and slower. I thought about the safe at home in Charlotte, the new combination known to no one but me, a number that existed because I had put in enough years of work to be assigned one. I thought about my sister, who had 12 months of probation ahead of her and 3 years before the record could be cleared, and who had posted a photograph of the ocean at 6:47 in the morning and written just what we needed, and had not asked a single question. I hoped she would start asking them. I didn't know if she would. That was not in my hands. I thought about my mother, somewhere in Charlotte, in a house I hadn't been inside in 18 months, beginning the work of probation and restitution, learning for the first time what it cost to take something that had serial numbers. And I thought about what Terry had said. In the car, when I was still counting missed calls and running the math on them, that knowing someone and caring for them are not the same thing, and I had confused the two for long enough that I had built a life around the confusion. I had been known in that house. I had been seen in the particular way of people who watch you closely because they want something from what they see. That was real. The watching had been real, the knowing had been real, and I had spent years treating it as love because I didn't know, yet, how to tell the difference. And because love was what I wanted it to be. And wanting something to be true is not nothing. It moves you. It shapes what you do and what you don't do and what combination you put on a safe. But I knew the difference now. And the knowing was not comfortable, but it was solid. And solid was what I needed. I rinsed the cup and left it in the rack and turned off the kitchen light. In the morning there would be work and coffee and the mountain on the horizon. In 3 months there would be a review of my assignment and a conversation about what came next. Sometime before that, Paige would turn 26. And I did not know yet whether I would call her. I thought I might, not to talk about everything, not to settle anything, just to find out who she was, now that a door had closed on the version of the family that had existed before. That seemed worth knowing. I lay down and pulled the blanket up and listened to the street outside do its quiet late-night things. And I did not count anything, and I did not measure anything, and the last thought I had before I fell asleep was so ordinary I almost missed it. I was fine, not fixed, not finished, just fine in the specific sense of still standing, still working, still here, with a badge number I'd earned, and a photograph I'd chosen, and a safe combination nobody knew but me. That was enough. For tonight, and probably for a while after, that was more than enough.